Our next honoree of the evening is Bob Montgomery. To tell you, yahoo! To tell you a little bit more about Bob, please welcome Captain Gary Ellis. Gary, come on up here.
Hey, very good. Thank you very much. There's a lot of guides here that learned from Bob Montgomery, and a lot of them that truly respect him. How many guides have been where Bob Montgomery, we know a lot of you out there. You've been out there. Bob was a Florida native, a second-generation guide, following in the footsteps of both his father and his uncle. He passed his love of fishing along to his daughter, Michelle, who is over here with his wife, Marie. Hello. Montgomery started light tackle fishing after he was discharged from the Navy. He had, I got to get into my notes here, but he had a very interesting time in the early years. We're lucky to have Bob to be returned to the United States after his Cubana airline flight from Havana to U.S. Naval Base in Guantanamo was hijacked by Castro. In 1958, he was 21 years old, the only American in 28 passengers on the flight. They were held captive for 6 days before being released to the International Red Cross. So he got lucky, and so did we, the Florida Keys fishing community. We got Bob back from Cuba. After his discharge from the Navy, Bob started light tackle fishing in Key West in January 1969, when there were only 2 other light tackle guides in town, one being his brother. According to the Key West guide, Jeffrey Cardenas, a lot of you remember him, he's still around. Up until the 1980s, when Jeffrey started guiding, Bob and Gene Montgomery had Key West tackle fishing virtually to themselves. Light tackle fishing, fly fishing off the coast of Key West. They stood apart from any of the few guides that were there. They fished the isolated wrecks, reefs, out of sight of land before the advent of GPS. Imagine for a moment, you young guides that have been around for a long time, the last few years, what would you do without a GPS? It wasn't easy. Bob could navigate his way to secret spots in his boat. His boat was the Blue Runner, using the long-lost art of dead reckoning, time, speed, distance, and he could go off into the Gulf of Mexico, out of sight of land, and be on top of a small wreck with the help of a couple birds. But time, speed, and distance, that was the key. He was also an expert on the flats. Bob knew the movement of tarpon almost as if he had a migratory road map of where the tarpon were moving. He knew where the permit were, his favorite fish, on what tide, on moon phase, was the permit. He knew where to be, what time, what moon phase, what tide. He knew the Marquesas Keys better than anyone, and most often in the 70s and 80s, Bob was the only guy there. He was the only person fishing the Marquesas Keys. A lot of the guides here in the audience could say, boy, I'd love to have been there. Captain Jeffrey Cardenas claimed Bob had a personality that was a bit curmudgeonous. Is that the word? Curmudgeon? At the time. If an angler missed an easy shot after 20 minutes of poling towards a school of fish, he would bark, practice your casting before you spend a couple $100 and waste my time. There was nothing malicious about this, not mean-spirited. Bob Montgomery was merely striving for perfection. He was good. And he didn't want to work his butt off to put you in a spot to not be as good as he was. Bob's outstanding reputation attracted many outstanding anglers. In 1971, he guided Jimmy Lopez, if you remember, to the Miami Met Tournament Master Angler. That was a tournament that we had in the city of Miami that went for years, and it was a very prestigious award to win the Master Angler of the Miami Met. Bob guided American Sportsman host Kurt Gowdy, who used to come down to the Keys quite often. He guided him on 2 ABC TV shows. One segment featured Terry Bradshaw. I don't know if you remember. This is back when he had a full head of hair, when Terry Bradshaw had long hair. This was in 1973. They were fishing for tarpon. He also did another show in 1974 with Jonathan Winters and Ernest Borgnine fishing the wrecks for cobia and jacks. But the show with Terry Bradshaw was one of Gowdy's best memories of the American Sportsman. Gowdy tells the story that they were at the Marquesas Keys, staked out on a long strip of white sand bottom where tarpon were coming down, sliding down the edge of the white sand. Since Bradshaw was not a fly fisherman, he couldn't fly fish. He was casting spinning lures at the tarpon, and they wouldn't eat. They refused to eat. Bob continued to say, they want to fly. They want to eat a fly. These fish want to eat a fly. Terry asked Kurt Gowdy to show him how to catch one on fly, and Kurt smiled. I thought you'd never ask. Kurt caught one about 70, 80 pounds right off the bat, first cast. They went back to the dock. Bob gave Terry Bradshaw, a crash course in fly fishing. He was a fast learner. With the cameras rolling on the white sand strip, Bob spotted a single tarpon coming 200 feet away. This is after they went back out on the beach. He instructed Bradshaw where to make the cast as to get it closer. Terry, his cast was perfect. He made 3 short strips. The fly disappeared into the bucket mouth of the huge fish, and they were amazed that they were hooked up on his first try. But the ensuing fight, the big fish turned, ripped the rod out of Terry's hand, and it went skipping across the water out in front of the boat. And, just like being on top of a good fumble, as a fumbled football, Bradshaw dove in the water, and he successfully covered the rod and the reel, not the fish. Bob and Kurt Gowdy were rolling on the deck in the back of the boat, just in bouts of laughter. Bob exclaimed he'd never seen a tarpon sack a quarterback before. Kurt Gowdy said it turned out to be the greatest footage that you could imagine, and it was a wonderful show. Montgomery was active in the early years of the Florida Keys Guides Association. He served on the board of directors. he did just a tremendous support for Florida Keys fishing guides. Bob was a different guy. You know, most swamp guides, we call them, Florida Keys fishing guides, backcountry guides or shallow water guides, they wouldn't tell you the time of day or where they've been or where they're going. And Bob wasn't like that. He would help you. He helped so many young guides get started and get to the places that you needed to be, although he did it with time, speed, and distance. He didn't have GPS. He didn't, so that was something you had to pretty much pick up yourself. He was instrumental in convincing the board to approve and support the first Redbone Celebrity Tournament Series to catch the cure for cystic fibrosis back in 1988. He was a supporter of ours for all of the years. He helped us in the tournament in Key West. He helped us create the tournament in Miami at Biscayne Bay. He and his wife Marie worked to do our tournament in 92 after the roof of their house had been blown off in Hurricane Andrew. So he was dedicated to good causes, and he was dedicated to the community, our sports fishing community that we have here in the Florida Keys, down in the Florida Keys and in South Florida. The fishing community owes much to Bob's knowledge and guidance over 3 decades of active guiding. He's truly a legend. His legacy is every life of countless lives that he's touched. And think about it, he's touched a number of us. Can you raise your hands how many Bob Montgomery has touched here in South Florida? God bless. Thank you.
Let me keep this one.
What'd I do?
Nothing. Thank you. Great job. I need this to follow my script. Next, Captain Bouncer Smith has a few great words on behalf of Bob Montgomery. You don't need a microphone, do you?
I was going to borrow your hat. God, I love that story. Used to dance on Skip's hat every morning. It's the only way I'd teach him anything about kite fishing. I was lucky enough to share a couple of experiences about Bob Montgomery, and even one with Bob Montgomery. We went down to fish a sailfish tournament with him, myself and Jerry Webb, and we had brand new state-of-the-art plug reels filled with 12-pound test for the sailfish tournament. Jerry took a bad beating that day because Jerry was our angler, I was the mate, Bob was the captain. And every fish that Jerry hooked, he'd backlash the reels. He took a lot of abuse. Jerry was a great angler, very good with a plug reel. But he had no control when the reels kept jumping out of gear. It took half a day to convince Bob that truly the reels were failing and not Jerry. But to give you an idea of what kind of guy Bob was, the next morning he had rebuilt all of our reels, and we didn't have any more reels jump out of gear. Probably saved the trip for us, but it was my only chance to fish with Bob. But what I want to convey was something that Gary had touched upon. I graduated from high school, got into the charter boat industry, fishing for sailfish, while my high school dream was to be a flats guide in Islamorada. So after a few years charter boat fishing, I finally went to Islamorada, went in the flats fishing business. My wife got sick. I had to come back to Miami, and I was trying to figure out where I was headed. And one of the guys I followed the career of all the time was Bob Montgomery, and the fact that he was flats fishing and tarpon fishing and sail fishing and wreck fishing on a daily basis. And I says, that's a perfect solution to all of my problems. I love bottom fishing, I love tarpon fishing, and I love sailfish. And if I can follow in Bob Montgomery's footsteps, I'll be in really good shape. So truly, Bob Montgomery was the model that I fashioned my business after. And it's been a hell of a great business model for 35 years. So I really owe a lot of it to Bob Montgomery. He was really a pioneer in light tackle fishing and a great idol to follow. So thank you very much.
I'm glad he taught you all that, Bouncer. You've been a great leader yourself. Thank you very much for that story. At this time, I'd like to present the Tommy Gifford Award, and to accept the award on behalf of her late husband, please welcome Marie Montgomery and also Michelle Montgomery Laurendale. Step over here, and we're going to look at that blonde lady right there for a quick picture. Marie, do you have a few words for us?
It's such an honor to be here tonight to accept the Tommy Gifford Award for Bob. Wished he was here to accept it. I'd like to thank Gary Ellis, Captain Gary Ellis, Captain Bouncer Smith for the kind words. I'd like to thank both of them, Mike Myatt and the committee, for bestowing this award to Bob. I wished he were here. He loved fishing more than anything. Michelle?
This would have meant the world to him. Thank you.
The good news is Bob is still here with us. Look at what Bouncer, he's carrying it on. So Bob is still with us and left a hell of a legacy.